YouTube channel LifeOfRevision. So as you can probably tell, this is my first video, so I apologise if the quality isn't great because I've never really done anything like this before, but it's something that I've wanted to do for a while. So now I've finished my GCSEs, I thought I would give it a go. So for my first video, I wanted to do a things I wish that I had known before I'd done my GCSEs in Year 11 video. So here are 10 tips that I would give to anyone who was about to go into Year 11 and take their GCSEs. But the first thing I would like to say is, honestly, GCSEs aren't as bad as people tend to make them out to be. Yes, they are stressful. Yes, Year 11 is stressful, but they're not as bad as you would expect them to be. And once you've started your exams, it gets a hell of a lot easier. You just get into the swing of it and you just kind of go with the flow, and they don't last as long as they seem like they're going to. And honestly, personally, I found that mocks were way worse than the actual thing. So without further ado, let's get on to the video. So I've sort of split my tips into two sections of 5. The first 5 being kind of general Year 11, and then the second 5 are sort of more around exam season. It will make more sense when we get there. So let's start with the first 5. So my first tip is try to do a little bit every day from the start, just so it never builds up to the point where you're starting to get overwhelmed with how much you've got to do. So I'd say just do an hour a day, or plan to, or half an hour a day even, it's probably fine. Just so, yeah, it never builds up to the point where you start getting really stressed when actually you've still got a while left. It doesn't need to be religious. If you miss a day, it's not like it's the end of the world. It's just keeping your brain going over the stuff that you've done a while ago. So I don't know if this is still the case for any of you, but I started some of mine in Year 9, so I had 3 years between when I'd started the content and when I took my exam. So I was starting to forget the content by Year 11, so I'd just keep going over that to make sure that it never completely faded out of my memory, and that was really, really helpful when trying to revise for my GCSEs. So my second tip would be to make sure that you take mocks seriously, but remember that they're not the real thing, and it doesn't matter if they don't go that well. So what I'd say is try to make sure you learn the content and do take them seriously and revise for them, but don't burn yourself out, which is a mistake that I made when it really doesn't help with your GCSEs in general, because you're just so tired for the period after mocks that actually it means that at this point where you could start kind of taking revision more seriously and kind of going, okay, well, this is what I got wrong, this is what I need to improve on, because that's what mocks should be for. I was just having to basically sleep a lot because I had just not revised in a sensible way for mocks. So yeah, take them seriously, but remember they are not the real thing. My third tip would be to make your study resources as you go along. I would recommend this throughout Year 10 as well, but for Year 11 I'd say it's much more crucial, because at the end of the year you just don't have time to start making all of these things that you want to use. So I liked to type up my condensed version of my notes. I just found it easier to revise from typed notes, don't know why, but it really helped me. And on that note, I will try to remember to link the ones that I have in the description below so you can download them and use them. I was on the old spec for some subjects, but I mean, science is science, right? So it should still be helpful, but just don't use it like religiously. It's not probably going to cover everything. And it might have some stuff that you don't need to cover, but it might be helpful for some of you, so I will link those below. But yeah, make any flashcards, mind maps, notes, anything you want to use, try to make them as you go along. So I would set aside half an hour for any subjects I'd had that day. I only had 4, so that kind of worked. And I'd just type up my notes, almost as if it was homework. So I'd just type it up every day. And it just meant that when I came to study, even for unit tests, I had everything ready, and it was so much easier than having to make the resources and then learn it. My fourth tip, throughout the whole of Year 11, you need to make sure that you fit your studying around extracurricular activities and not the other way around. Personally, I'm not someone who has a lot of extracurricular activities, but you need to make sure that if you do, you shouldn't just cut them all out because you need to be revising. You don't. It should be that revision goes in your spare time within reason. Obviously, if you're just constantly at other stuff, then maybe you need to think about that, but it should, revision should be in your spare time, not what's kind of taking over your life and deciding what you can and can't do around it. My fifth tip would be to make sure you use the people around you. So studying with friends is always a really good thing to do, especially if you're struggling for motivation. So I used to go to a coffee shop with some of my friends sometimes, and we'd just explain things to each other. If there was a topic one of us didn't understand and the other one did, we'd teach it to the other person, which helps both of you because you can then check your understanding, and obviously you're teaching it to them, so they will hopefully understand it a bit better. We'd go through past papers together, and then just see. It just makes it much more tolerable than just sitting at a desk in the same place every day revising. So yeah. So now for my tips, which are based more around exam season. So my first tip would be to make sure that you plan your revision. So I used to have an Excel spreadsheet, as I mentioned before, with my 40-minute slots and 10-minute breaks, and I'd just set the subjects aside before I did that before exam season. I just spent a couple of hours setting out when I was going to do each subject, factoring any exams I had, factoring anything else I had in, and I just had a spreadsheet and I just filled it all in with what subjects I was going to do when, and then on either the evening before or the morning of, I would decide exactly what topics I was going to do. But if you're going to do that, make sure you do it realistically, because it's really demoralising and demotivating if you just have a huge list of everything you want to get done, and at the end of the day you've not even done half of it. Even though you've probably done a lot, it just doesn't feel good. And so make sure that what you're doing is realistic, so it's motivating, and make sure that you don't also underestimate it. So you want enough, but you don't want to do too much, otherwise it will just demotivate you. So make sure that you study in short chunks with breaks. So as I said, I work in 40-minute chunks with 10-minute breaks, which I didn't know worked until near the end of my exam season, unfortunately. So I used to work in 2-hour slots with 20-minute breaks, and it just doesn't work. You can't concentrate for that long. So I would recommend trying to find the time that works for you, and I'd say never work for more than sort of an hour at a time, otherwise your productivity just plummets, and there's no point in doing that amount of time. It just won't help. So my 8th tip is to work out what works for you. So for example, I worked out that I'm much better at studying in the morning, so I would get up at 5:30 every morning during study leave. I'd start working at 6, but then I'd be finished by 5 in the evening, and I'd have the whole evening to myself because I found that was just when I was less productive. And then I would take a lunch break at the same time that my lunch break is at school, so then I'd start at the time my exam would start, and that just, it helps you get into the routine of it. But again, work out what works for you. I know that some people work a lot better in the evening, so maybe they'd sort of take more of the morning off and start at 11 and then end at 11. That sounds like a bit of a long time, but you get where I'm coming from. Work out what works for you and base it off that. My 9th tip is one that you will probably hear absolutely everywhere, but I still think it's worth reiterating, is you need to make sure that you look after yourself during exam season as well. You need to exercise, even if that's going for a walk every day. That's what I try to do. I try to get out of the house at least once a day during study leave. You need to sleep enough, you need to eat enough, because otherwise your brain just can't function well enough. So actually your revision is less helpful if you haven't done these things. So make sure you exercise, sleep and eat properly during exam season. And my last tip is to vary your study methods depending on the subject. So personally, I don't know why, but I always like to do the same thing for everything. I like to be consistent throughout my subjects, and it's just not that helpful when subjects require different things. For example, for maths, you're much better off doing past papers than reading over your notes, whereas there's some subjects where actually you need to make sure you've got to grips with the content before you can start doing past papers. So yeah, I'd say definitely take into account the subject and various study methods, but also vary the time you're putting into them depending on how good you are at the subject. So I know that there were some of my subjects that I found much easier than others, so I put less time into those than I did with the subjects that I found harder and I needed to pull my grade up more. But varying your study methods also, it just means you get more engaged with it because it's more interesting, because you're not doing the same thing day after day after day, at which point you can just start getting bored, and then that's never a good position to be in when you're bored with your revision. I mean, I know it's not the most enjoyable thing ever, but you want to try and make it as tolerable as possible because it's kind of gonna happen. It's a natural part of being in year 11 is you're gonna have that period where you are revising for your exams. So that brings me to the end of my tips. Thank you for watching this video. As I said, I will try and leave my notes below. I will also leave my Instagram down in the comments below, where I like to post time lapses of my study sessions. It helps keep me motivated because I'm off my phone. Well, that's another tip I'd say, is I absolutely love the Forest app. If you download that, it keeps you off your phone while you're studying, and it is so helpful. But yeah, the other thing to do is you can film time lapses. Apparently that works, but it does. And other people have said that it helps to motivate them as well. If they're seeing that someone else is working, it makes them think, oh, I could be doing that. So yeah, my Instagram will be down below with my revision notes. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you have any requests of things you'd like to see, then feel free to DM me on Instagram or comment. Yeah, again, thanks for watching, and I hope to see you soon. Bye!